The Winnipeg Jets are back on a win streak. Surprise, surprise. Harrison Lee of Locked On Winnipeg Jets joins us to discuss what they're doing right and what their prospects are for the second half of the season. We've got that and a lot more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here. Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, Harrison Lee. And Harrison, the Jets back on track, a 3-game winning streak. What was the difference now? What has been working so well over the last few games and really over the whole season if you look at the big picture?
Well, for one thing, they're finally at home. That 10 or 11 game road trip was just completely brutal. I feel like the NHL schedule makers were a little cruel with that one. They had one of the hardest stretches, I think, of any team in the league. And, given where all of these teams were geographically, it was a lot. And then, of course, they lose, their most important defender outside of Morrissey and Sandberg. And, the rest was kind of like domino effects. It all sort of fell apart. Ehlers then goes down for a couple of games. So they've dealt with some serious adversity, but things are starting to calm down a little bit. Finally, the Jets power play is now back to full strength with Ehlers back in tow. He's been a huge difference maker there. So it's good to see him back. But I think it's just, not as much travel, a little calmer. And I think the next 10 odd games or so, the Jets are going to be in Winnipeg, which is nice. A little strange. I don't quite understand what the schedule makers were up to, but okay. I don't know if it's because of the Four Nations stuff or what, but man, some of the odd scheduling for the Jets this year in particular, compared to a lot of other teams, I just, if there's one thing I can quibble with already, it's probably that. But Winnipeg has managed to stabilize. Hellebuyck is still Hellebuyck, so you never have to worry about that. But it is nice to see the 5v5 offense the past couple of games actually starting to do stuff again. For a little bit, it was definitely muted, but seems like they have at least started putting 2 and 2 back together.
The Jets are first in the league right now in goals scored, and everybody's talking Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, Josh Morrissey for his setting people up. Give me the names of a couple of guys who maybe people who don't follow the Jets every day have really been contributing but aren't making a lot of headlines.
I think one of the biggest guys that probably falls on this list is Adam Lowry. Although Jets fans will certainly love him, Lowry is kind of like their bulldozer. I think sometimes they actually lean a little too heavily on him. He's obviously very good at what he does, basically caving in depth players and bottom lines. But I think the Jets have really asked him to be like this versatile, do-it-all, forechecking beast line this year. And I'd say the past couple of weeks, it's been a little more mixed, but, towards the start of the season, they were crushing their minutes. And, really it was this team's constructions is super funny because you've got a Jets top line that's kind of mediocre by some top line standards. And then you've got the Lowry line that's like the best third line in hockey, but they're basically playing like a second line role. So Winnipeg is just a very upside down kind of team. But I think Lowry's probably been one of the really big catalysts. Neil Pionk, also very funny. He has been a huge portion of this team's offense. It's definitely not been the same without Sandberg. With Sandberg, the Jets have like one of the best, I would say, overall second pairings around. But without Sandberg, he has been a nightmare. So really important to have Dylan back, and that pairing has been really honestly better than the Morrissey pairing. I know a lot of people see the points for Morrissey and stuff, and they're like, oh, that's clearly your number one. And it's like, well, Dylan DeMello's kind of taken a step back this year. So without that, I think it's really come down to Sandberg and Pionk being one of the D pairings that I actually trust the most. I do know that there's going to be some some mishaps, and we know that Neal sometimes defensively he misses some reads and assignments, but the offense that he has where he just sort of becomes your fourth forward out there, that's been a really big blessing and something that's been very helpful for the Jets. It does probably mean they're going to re-sign him long term, so that's a little concerning, but we'll have to just wait and see on that one at least.
The power play is elite at the top of the league right now, but the penalty kill a little below average, 20th right now. What has to happen for that to improve? What are they not doing well?
Really weird, because the PK at the start of the year was much better. They've really backed off the pressure a lot. It feels like they're a little reticent to go after puck carriers and pressure guys more towards their own blue line, and so they sort of like drop deeper, shell up, and they get really close in front of Hellebuyck, and that just ends up being a nightmare because then there's too many passing seams, and I feel like it was an adjustment to try and compensate maybe for some of the lack of personnel. But I think with Winnipeg, the more that you back off pressure, the worse that things get. And that's definitely true for the PK. Like I said earlier this year, it really was pretty decent. It was at least like league average. And honestly, even now at 20th, it's not as bad as it was. But it's definitely been leakier the past couple of weeks. If they don't get the pressure back, I think that's going to be a really big problem. It's why they were bottom of the league the last couple of years. Would really appreciate if it's not even just middle of the pack would be a huge boost for this team, especially in the back half of the season. So hopefully that turns around quickly, but we'll have to have a few guys healthier before then, I would imagine.
We are approaching the midway point of the season, calendar about to flip to 2025. As we get closer to the second half, what do you think the Jets will look to do to fine-tune this team and get ready for the playoff stretch drive?
I think they'll want two things, and I think that they'll only be able to really afford one of them. They'll have to probably make a compromise on the second part, but their primary want is going to be a 2C. Lambert's not really ready for it. I love Brad. He's very fun, and I think in the latter games that he played with Winnipeg earlier this year, he did start to show some real growth. But in terms of what the Jets really need out of that line, especially alongside Ehlers and Perfetti, you probably need a proven option. I know we were joking a little bit before the show about Brock Nelson maybe being a really big target. I think he's like the ideal kind of center the Jets are after. Big body, big net front presence. Also just skates. Like he can actually skate. For a 6'4" dude, he's pretty swift. Winnipeg doesn't have a lot of foot speed, and that's kind of been one of the things that you get to the playoffs and it shows up in a big way. So if they can find somebody who's not, sluggish and who can also contribute offensively, which knock on wood is very Brock Nelson-y, I think that's going to be a big thing. Their second want is going to be a right-sided top four defender or maybe a lefty, one of those two. And I just don't know if they're going to have the assets to try and make a big play. I don't know how big they're going to be chasing here. I think that they've seen with the injury crisis, Logan Stanley is playing with Pionk at times. Colin Miller's on his offside right now. You just have a whole mess of things. And like the moment that Sandberg went down, kind of the whole defense fell apart. So the Jets definitely have a really big personnel need. I think DeMello himself not being at his best has been a little bit of a surprise. He just started his extension, but he's really not been the same guy that he was the last few years. And I don't know if it's an injury, if it's age catching up, but if that's the case, the Jets have a huge, huge hole on the right side. So Rasmus Andersson, I think, would be a very interesting target. They're not going to go for that unless they absolutely find some home run kind of deal. But I don't see that materializing. So they could try for I saw an article from I think the Free Press or something for Winnipeg talking about Alexiak and Ristolainen. Not options that I'd really be after. Alexiak's pretty solid. I'd be okay with that. But we're talking Ristolainen or David Savard. I think you'd just be better served leaning on one of your internal guys. But we all know the Jets have made some interesting trades the last few years. So as long as it's cheap, I suppose it couldn't be too bad, but we'll just have to see. But I would love if they can at least find an upgrade for either the third or the second pairing.
There's been a little talk about attendance. Is it a major concern right now for this organization? And if so, what can they do about it?
It's a concern in the sense that they are trying to address it. What I think tends to get missed is it's all corporate sales. That's really the problem. The Jets were kind of, I don't want to say arrogant, but they definitely I think took things a little for granted for the first 10 years or so and didn't really target corporate sponsors as much. Past couple of years, they've definitely said it's a problem. This year, I think they're making a really concerted effort to try and fix it. And they've definitely seen some growth. We've had a couple more sellouts this year than we did last year. So that's a positive step, but it does take time. I mean, business relationships, especially from a business community that I think feels a little bit spurned by True North, those bridges probably will take a little time to heal. But I think in the long run, you'll see that stuff kind of iron out. The Jets, relatively speaking, are still in many ways a nascent organization. Although I think now that the honeymoon period is over, they really need to update and modernize in some areas. But they're cognizant, they're trying to fix it, and I think that's probably the most important part. Making that first step and then going from there.
All right, Harrison, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
They can find me at HLLivingLoco and LO_Winnipeg Jets on X/Twitter. And we are at Locked On Winnipeg Jets on all of the same podcasting platforms that Locked On NHL is.
All right, Harrison, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Well, that definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon.